The moment my daughter looked me dead in the eyes across that candle-lit table and said, "Dad, you're an embarrassment," I felt something inside me go very quiet, not the quiet of hurt, but the quiet of a man who has just made a decision. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I have spent 53 years learning the difference between love and enabling. It took me most of those years to figure out which one I had been practicing with my daughter, Vivienne. I built my wealth the hard way, not through inheritance, not through luck, but through 26 years of running a mid-sized logistics company that I started in a rented garage with 2 employees and a second-hand delivery van. By the time Vivienne was born, we were comfortable. By the time she turned 10, we were more than comfortable. By the time she graduated college, I had quietly set aside $750,000 in a trust fund with her name on it, intended to be released on her 30th birthday, which was 8 months away. She didn't know the exact figure. I had always believed that children who knew the precise size of their inheritance stopped becoming adults, but she knew it existed. She knew it was substantial. And somewhere along the way, that knowledge had curdled into something I didn't recognize until that evening at Rosario's. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner. My wife Carol had suggested it weeks earlier. "We haven't all sat down together since Christmas," she said, which was true. Vivienne lived across the city in an apartment I helped finance, working, loosely using the term, as a creative consultant, which as far as I could tell meant she attended launch parties, advised startups she had no expertise in, and posted aspirational content on social media. She was 29 years old and had never paid a bill that I didn't ultimately subsidize. I had chosen Rosario's because it was Vivienne's favorite restaurant. White tablecloths, dim lighting, the kind of place where the bread basket costs more than a full meal elsewhere. I made the reservation. I drove across town to pick up my mother, Evelyn, who was 78 and had driven from her retirement community 40 miles away specifically for this dinner. Carol had spent the afternoon getting her hair done. I wore the blazer Vivienne had once told me made me look actually respectable. I was trying. That was the part that still sits with me even now. I was trying. Vivienne arrived 11 minutes late with her boyfriend, Marcus, who I had met twice before and who communicated primarily in vague affirmations and long silences. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. She kissed Carol on the cheek, gave my mother a brief hug, and sat down. The first 20 minutes were fine. We ordered drinks. My mother told a story about her neighbor's garden. Carol talked about a renovation project we were considering for the back porch. Marcus nodded at appropriate intervals. Vivienne scrolled her phone beneath the table, which I noticed but said nothing about. Then the conversation turned to money. It wasn't my doing. It was Marcus who mentioned, offhandedly, that he and Vivienne had been looking at properties, investment properties. He used the word portfolio several times. Vivienne's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, bright and eager and alive, the way she used to look as a child when she talked about the things she cared about. "We found this incredible opportunity," she said, leaning forward. "A duplex in the Meridian district. It's undervalued because the previous owners had issues, but the bones are perfect. We'd renovate, rent out one unit, live in the other." "That sounds ambitious," Carol said carefully. "It's a great market right now," Marcus added. "How are you planning to finance it?" I asked, a reasonable question, a natural question. Vivienne's eyes flicked to me with an expression I had seen before, the particular impatience of someone who considers a question an obstacle rather than a conversation. "We'd need some help with the down payment. We're talking about our future, Dad, our actual future." "How much help?" $250,000. The table went quiet for a moment. My mother looked at her bread plate. Carol took a sip of water. "That's a significant amount," I said. "I'd want to look at the numbers. Have you put together a business plan? Talked to a financial advisor?" And that's when it happened. Vivienne set down her fork. She looked at me the way you look at something that has disappointed you so many times you've stopped bothering to hide it. And she said, loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over, "Dad, you're an embarrassment. I'm trying to have a real conversation about building something, and you sit there with your little questions like you're interviewing me for a job. Do you know how exhausting it is? Do you have any idea how much I've had to apologize for you over the years?" I said nothing. "You've always done this," she continued, her voice picking up momentum the way a fire does when it finds fresh air. "Every time I have an idea, every time I try to do something, you treat me like I'm incompetent, like I need to justify myself to you. Marcus's parents don't do this. They believe in him. They trust him. But you always need your questions answered." Marcus was staring at the table. My mother's face had gone very still. Carol's hand found mine beneath the tablecloth and held it. I looked at my daughter. This woman I had held in a hospital room 29 years ago. This person for whom I had sacrificed sleep and worry, and the kind of peace that only comes when you're not responsible for keeping someone else alive. And I felt that quiet settle over me. Not anger, not hurt. Something much calmer and in some ways much more final. "Vivienne," I said, "I think we should enjoy the rest of dinner." She took that as a victory. I could see it in the way she settled back into her chair, the slight satisfaction around her mouth. Marcus refilled her wine glass. The conversation moved on. My mother talked about her roses. Carol ordered the salmon. I ate my meal. I spoke when spoken to. I paid the check, all of it, including the bottle of wine Marcus had selected without looking at the price, and I drove my mother home. On the way, she said only one thing. We were stopped at a red light, the city sliding past the windows, and she said, "Your father never would have stood for that, Daniel." "I know, Mom. But you're not your father." "No," I agreed, "I'm not." She patted my hand, and we drove the rest of the way in silence. When I got home, Carol was in the kitchen making tea. She didn't say anything for a while. She knows me well enough, 31 years of marriage will do that, to understand that sometimes I need to arrive at a thing on my own terms. I sat at the kitchen table, and I thought about the word embarrassment. I thought about the trip I had taken 6 years ago, alone, to close a deal in Edmonton that saved 43 jobs at our distribution center, canceling a vacation Carol, and I had been planning for 8 months, because the alternative was laying off people who had families and mortgages and children of their own. I thought about the years I drove a 10-year-old car while Vivienne's tuition payments went through, because we could afford one or the other and I chose her. I thought about the emergency fund I rebuilt 3 times over, once after the 2008 crisis nearly gutted us, once after a flood damaged our main warehouse, once after a key client pulled their contract without warning, because I understood, in a way my daughter had never been asked to understand, that security is not a given. It is constructed carefully by people who ask the right questions at the right time. Questions, she had called them, like questions were a character flaw. Carol set a cup of tea in front of me. She sat across from me and wrapped her hands around her own mug and said, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I've been raising a person who believes that inheritance is compensation for tolerating family." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call Richard in the morning." Richard Halsey was my estate attorney. We had worked together for 15 years. He was thorough, discreet, and he had never once told me what I wanted to hear, which is exactly why I trusted him. The call took 40 minutes. Richard listened without interrupting, another quality I valued in him. When I finished, he said, "You want to restructure the trust." "I want to dissolve it." A pause. "That's your right. The assets would revert to your estate. What are you thinking in terms of redistribution?" I had been thinking about that all night. "A scholarship fund," I said, "administered through the University Foundation, first-generation college students, engineering and business." That's a meaningful legacy, Daniel. There's also a community organization Carol has been involved with, the one that does workforce development for people coming out of the corrections system. I want them to receive a portion. Of course. And my mother's care. I want to ensure she's covered for anything she might need fully, without limits. Easily done. I looked out the window at the morning. The yard was just beginning to catch the early light. The remaining portion, I said, I'd like to put in a conditional account. Vivienne can access it at 35 rather than 30, but only with proof of 2 years of sustained, verifiable income from employment she has obtained and maintained independently. No creative consulting, actual employment with tax returns to show it. And if she doesn't meet those conditions, then the money goes to the scholarship fund. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll have the documents drafted by end of week. I did not call Vivienne that day or the next. She called me on a Thursday, 4 days after the dinner. I suspect she had expected an apology by then, or at minimum some softening, some reaching out. The silence had clearly unsettled her. Dad. Her voice was guarded in the way voices get when the speaker is not yet sure which direction a conversation will go. Vivienne. About the other night, she paused. I was frustrated. The conversation wasn't going how I wanted, and I said things in a way that was probably harsher than they needed to be. I noticed the construction carefully. Things said in a harsh way, not I said something wrong, not I hurt you, the passive architecture of a non-apology. I appreciate you calling, I said. So we're okay. I've been doing some thinking, I said, about the trust fund. A brief silence. What about it? I've restructured it. A longer silence. What does that mean? I explained it to her. Not with anger, not with drama, just clearly the way I would explain a business decision to an employee. The dissolution, the scholarship fund, my mother's care provisions, the conditional account she could still access at 35 if she met the criteria. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. You're punishing me, she finally said. Her voice was different now, younger somehow, stripped of the social polish. Because of one dinner. I'm not punishing you. I'm making a decision about resources I have the right to direct. That money was mine. No, I said, gently but clearly. It was never yours. It was money I chose to set aside for you, which I am now choosing to redirect. Those are two different things. Dad. Vivienne, I love you. I want to be clear about that before anything else. But love doesn't mean handing someone $750,000 in exchange for tolerating them. That's not love. That's a transaction. And I've been in business long enough to know that when someone shows you what they believe a relationship is worth, you should believe them. I heard her breath on the line, unsteady. The conditional account is real, I continued. 35 is not far away. 6 years. Show me you can build something of your own and the money is there, not as a reward, as a confirmation that you're someone who will use it the way it's meant to be used. And if I don't, the question was small, careful. Then 47 first-generation college students will get an education they couldn't otherwise afford, and I'll be proud of that too. I won't pretend the months that followed were easy. Vivienne did not speak to me for 6 weeks. Carol navigated that period with more grace than I had any right to expect, maintaining her own relationship with our daughter without making me the villain, which I know required real effort and real diplomacy. When Vivienne did reach out again, it was a different kind of call. She had, she said, been offered a position at a supply chain consultancy, a real position, with a salary and benefits and a title that meant something. She'd taken it. I wanted you to know, she said. I'm glad, I said. How does it feel? A pause, terrifying, she admitted. Different. Different how? Like I have to actually do something, every day. A short, surprised laugh. I didn't realize how much I'd been avoiding that. I didn't say I know. I didn't say I could have told you. I said, tell me about the work. And she did. For 45 minutes she talked and I listened, and it was the best conversation we'd had in years. 8 months later, Richard sent me the updated documentation on the scholarship fund. The first cohort of recipients had been selected, 12 students, engineering and business majors, first in their families to attend university. Their photographs were included in the foundation's annual report, which arrived in the mail one afternoon in late October. I sat with it for a long time. There was a young woman from a small town 3 hours north, the daughter of a farmhand, studying civil engineering. A young man who had spent 2 years working in a grocery warehouse before saving enough to enroll part-time. A woman, 31 years old, who had raised 2 kids before deciding she wasn't done yet. People who had never assumed anything was coming to them. People who had asked the right questions at the right time of the right problems and kept asking, even when no one was listening. My mother called that evening, as she often did on Sundays. "Have you heard from Vivienne?" she asked. "We talked Wednesday," I said. "She's doing well, the job is going well." "And you, how are you?" I looked at the annual report on the table in front of me. At the faces of 12 people who would never know my name, never know what was said at a dinner table 11 months ago, never know the strange and private chain of events that had led to their scholarships being funded. "I'm good, Mom," I said. "I think I'm actually good." She made a small sound, the sound she makes when she's pleased but doesn't want to say so directly, a habit she has carried since I was a boy. "Your father," she said, "would have asked the same questions." "I know. But the answers he got," she added, "might have been different." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up, about the difference between what we ask and what we're willing to hear, about how a question is only ever as useful as the courage behind it, the willingness to act on whatever answer comes back, even when that answer is devastating, even when it costs you something, even when it costs you someone you love. Vivienne was not gone from my life. She was, if anything, more present in it, in a way that felt earned rather than automatic, real rather than obligated. We were learning each other again, slowly, the way you learn someone when the comfortable assumptions have been stripped away and you have to actually look. That, I had decided, was worth more than $750,000. Though I'll admit, watching 12 strangers get to build their futures with it came pretty close. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to fund a future their child hasn't yet decided to earn. Daniel Mercer didn't cancel his daughter's future. He made her build her own.